Right, well, welcome to our webinar. Today's topic is Where There's Crisis, There is Opportunity. Today's webinar is going to be run by Anchor Smith, and that's me. I'm a Chartered Accountant and Director of Q2 Limited, and we help the owners of small businesses achieve their financial and business goals. And presenting with me today, we have Linda Moore. Linda trained as an accountant also and is a Director of Money Mentalist and a Certified Money Mentor Coach. Linda helps people make better decisions about money by understanding their emotional triggers better. So we want to start with an opening thought. And the thought is that facts do not cease to exist just because you choose to ignore them. We live in really extraordinary times, and although we could just ignore that fact, that is not a smart option from either a business or a personal perspective. As I said, we're living in really unusual times. We have global and political instability with Russia invading Ukraine, China flexing its muscles, a US election coming up in 2024 with potentially Donald Trump standing again, and a New Zealand election just next year. We have all endured 2 years of global pandemic, complete with lockdowns, which have proved fatal for many businesses, and COVID coupled with the Ukraine war has created some really difficult supply chain issues with delays in manufacturing and shipping goods, as well as huge increases in freight charges. To ensure that wholesalers have stock to sell, they are ordering earlier, and they're also having to carry more stock, which of course takes more cash because the old just-in-time business model no longer works. And some businesses are trying to sell stock that has not even been manufactured yet. So for example, I've just waited 11 months for my new car to arrive, and I'm still waiting on a sofa they ordered in mid-March 22, and delivery is to be expected in October. In early 2020, when COVID hit, businesses worldwide completely misjudged the effect that it would have, and they reduced their manufacturing capacity in the expectation that consumer demand would die. However, history shows that the opposite actually happened, and demand soared as consumers were stuck at home and turned to internet shopping, and suppliers such as Zoom boomed as people worked from home and changed the method of doing things. Globally, governments printed money to prop up their economies to avoid the expected economic recession, and in so doing, interest rate drops to record lows of around 2% in New Zealand. The world was awash with money, and in response, many people borrowed. They bought more expensive properties, other goods, and also pumped up the value of stocks worldwide. So 2 years later, governments are rapidly raising interest rates in order to curb inflation. The people who borrowed cheap money to buy overvalued property or shares are now facing a less rosy scenario with increasing interest costs and declining property values, declining Kiwisaver balances, as well as other portfolios. And as we all know, in New Zealand, the construction industry almost came to its knees over a shortage of board. So how on earth did we get into such a situation where such a basic standard product is in such short supply? On top of all that, there doesn't seem to be enough workers, and businesses worldwide are hunting for talent. Our current immigration policy is making it really difficult for qualified people wanting to work in New Zealand to get a work visa. New Zealand is also competing with other countries for good staff, and since good staff are scarce, talented workers in New Zealand are asking for pay rises in the knowledge that they can get larger pay packets elsewhere if their current employer doesn't come to the party. This has led to staff retention challenges as well as recruitment problems, so getting and retaining good staff now is particularly difficult. And on top of that, the staff that you do have are getting sick more often, and they stay sick for longer with mandatory COVID isolation and flu on the rampage. Many people were planning to go on the OE over the last couple of years and had to postpone it. But now the borders are open once again. They're heading overseas for their traditional Kiwi overseas experience. Good for them, but not so good for us employers who are looking for good young people to work in our businesses. Anti-money laundering legislation has been around for a while now, and most of us will have experienced it when we've been trying to open perhaps a bank account or borrow money or buy a property or something like that. The added cost of AML processes affects us all as it slows down these processes, and it also increases the cost of doing business, particularly for banks and lawyers and accountants who want to take on new clients. IRD is also increasing the compliance cost, in particular for family trusts. And in general, IRD is no longer Mr. Nice Guy, and they're starting to get much more heavy-handed when it comes to debt collection. They've been really lenient over the last couple of years, but that's coming to an end. And in New Zealand, we've experienced the recent effects of climate change. The South Island ski fields have had huge dumps of snow, while Mount Ruapehu has struggled even to open in August. And recent flooding in Nelson and other parts of New Zealand is an ongoing nightmare for many. The rebuild and cleanup costs are going to be enormous. School children have had their education interrupted by lockdowns. An increasing number of children are not even attending school regularly, which is going to have an impact when those children reach the workforce. It will also increase the divide between those that have and those that have not, because the children from less affluent households tend to have less support available to them. And all these things are affecting us personally too, dealing with COVID illnesses and lockdowns and potentially losing loved ones, being forced to work from home while perhaps also trying to homeschool our children, and all the other challenges that we have faced over the past 2.5 years have made us rethink our lives and our priorities. Some of us are now working from home permanently or part of the week, and the traditional work model of commuting and then working 9 to 5 in an office may never be the norm again. These are the facts, and we can't just ignore them, hoping they're going to go away.
Well, thank you, Anne. I mean, this is a real reality check, isn't it? And this is what we're going on as business owners. So, what's happening out there is not only affecting us in our businesses, but it's also affecting us personally. And this is what I want to talk about, is this thing about, well, what is financial anxiety? So Anne's just gone through a big list of everything that we have been dealing with for the last couple of years. I mean, let's face it, even the weather isn't behaving itself right now. And I guess just to sort of paraphrase some of the things that are affecting us personally, we've got interest rates rising, and we've got our living expenses increasing. We all know it's costing us more at the supermarket and at the fuel tank. Property prices are falling, and a lot of us are using our houses to help prop up our businesses. So we've got that added stress there. Now, inflation is also on the rise. And this is something that we haven't had for a very long time. Now, inflation is actually completely normal. We all know that over time, prices go up. But this rapid inflation that we are experiencing now is not what we're used to. And that's actually quite scary, because it makes it really hard for us to plan in our businesses and our lives. And it's really hard on us psychologically as well for us to accept this. Now, as Anne said, during COVID, governments pumped money into the economy. And as individuals, we took it. We spent it. We were like little old teenagers. We borrowed what we could. We took all this cheap money that was available. And this pushes demand up, which pushes prices up. Now, all of this government support has now stopped. And it's like the balloon that they were hanging on to. They forgot to tie the string, and it's been let go, and all of this air is now just escaping. Now, please, I'm not an economist, so this is very much an oversimplification of what inflation is. But the reality is, it's time to pay the piper. Now, what I'd like you to think about very specifically for your own situation are these 3 questions. So you might want to jot these down. So specifically, what have you personally noticed has increased in price? Now, this isn't just globally, groceries have gone up, because some things that you buy at the supermarket may have gone up, others may not have, or across the board. So what have you actually seen? How are they personally impacting you? Again, be very specific. What changes have you in your household had to have done because of these increases in prices? And in terms of financial anxiety, this is a really important distinction to make. Are you feeling stressed because you're having to make changes? Or is it because of what you are seeing and hearing in the media? Now, that's a very, very important distinction, because one of those aspects you can control, the other of it is not so controllable. Now, the other thing that I just wanted to make note of here is that, unfortunately, we're actually hardwired for negativity. And you can blame our cavemen forebears for this, because they had to worry about being eaten by wild animals. Now, we don't have that concern, but we still get this anxiety and stress that goes along with it. Now, apparently, we have somewhere between 15 to 60,000 thoughts per day, of which 80% are negative. That 80% of thoughts are the ones that we ruminate on, that we think about, that keep us awake at night. Well, what happens to the other 20% that are the happy thoughts? Well, it's a bit like a sieve. They come in one end and they just flow out the other. That's not bad news, because when you know that you can shift your focus and shift your thinking and focus more on happy thoughts and not so much on the negative thoughts. Well, what is this thing called financial anxiety? Well, before I get into too much detail about it, I just want to give you a little bit more understanding about it. So first of all, it is real. It's what keeps us awake at night. You know, you wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning and the tummy's kind of doing somersaults, and you start to think these negative thoughts, and you get in this chain of doom and gloom. That's financial anxiety. Now, it affects our moods, and it affects us physically, and it affects our emotional well-being as well. How does it show up? It shows up in our thoughts. It shows up how we think, how we feel, and how we behave. Not just with money, but across all aspects of it. Now, also just a bit of a myth here. It doesn't matter what your level of income is or what your financial stability is. You can still feel financial anxiety. It doesn't care who you are, it's going to get you at some point in time. So what happens when we get financial anxiety? Well, we're going to do initially one of three things. We're going to go into fight mode. Now, this is where we get angry, we get grumpy, we go into attack mode. This is where we can get into conflict. We want to blame everybody, we start insulting people. We might get grumpy with our bank manager, our accountant, or our spouse. In flight mode, we want to hide. This is where we go into denial mode. We get quite fearful about things. We start to avoid, and this is where self-sabotage can start to kick in. And so you're not thinking properly about the decisions that you're actually making. So self-sabotage is one area that when you're in flight mode, that you know you're potentially going into. When we go into freeze mode, it's like shock. We're numb. It's a bit like the possum in the headlights kind of thing. We just don't know what to do. So if someone says, sell something, we'll go, oh, okay, I'll do it. Okay. So we get very indecisive, and then we can make some silly decisions, and we go and we justify or we rationalize why we are making these decisions. And depending on what your money personality is, and if you don't know what that is, you can jump onto my website and find out, we can go into a cycle of spending emotionally. We can go into this space where we just work incredibly hard. We can be going into this kind of super tight miser frugality type space, or we can go into this mode of I've just got to help everybody, and we start enabling everybody. We start to shut down, and we keep the worry to ourselves. Now, this is really interesting, because I talked to some of my money coach colleagues in the States, and this seems to be a Kiwi thing. We don't seem to be very good at sharing when we get into this type of mode. We go into this Kiwi can do, she'll be right, we can fix it ourselves. Whereas in the States, they just go into therapy. So if you're exhibiting any of those types of behaviours, you are probably suffering from a bit of financial anxiety. Back to you, Anne.
Okay, thanks, Linda. Right, so what is Q2? So back in the 1980s, 1990s, Stephen Covey wrote several best-selling business books. They were The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and First Things First. Now, in those books, Stephen introduced his time management matrix, which is splitting all activities into 4 different quadrants. Quadrant 1 is the activities that are urgent and important. And these are things such as filing or tax returns on time, responding to client orders or complaints, staff issues, firefighting, crisis management, as well as a lot of the day-to-day activities of running your business. Then we have quadrant 3. Now, quadrant 3 are the things that seem urgent, but they're not actually that important. They may be urgent for somebody else, but they're not important to you. This includes things such as interruptions, perhaps some phone calls, some emails, meetings, and reports, and so on. Then we have quadrant 4. These things are not urgent and they're not important either. And this includes things such as trivia and busy work, junk emails, some phone calls, social media. Basically, it's distractions and time wasters. So that leaves quadrant 2. And quadrant 2, or Q2 for short, is the important but not urgent things. And these are the things that we should be spending more time on, including things such as prevention, preparation, values clarification, skills development, planning, relationship building, recreation, and empowerment. Now, that last one, empowerment, is really important because, as Linda said, all the news we're hearing at the moment makes us feel really disempowered. I mean, what can any SME business owner do about the war in Ukraine? What can we do about global inflation or interest rates or Donald Trump or even the ram raids in our local communities? There's nothing we can do about those things. So quadrant 2 is all about taking back power by concentrating on the things that we can control. This is a really important point because there's no point stressing over things we have no control over. Q2 is all about what we can control. And if we're a business owner, we know that we need to spend time working on the things that are important to us, even if they're not necessarily urgent. For example, creating a business plan. Which brings me to the rocks in the jar. Now, Stephen Covey, he introduced the rocks in the jar concept, which is actually quite famous. But for those of you who have not heard it before, the story goes something like this. So a university lecturer enters the lecture theatre with a large glass jar and some large rocks and some smaller pebbles and some sand and some water, all in different containers. And the lecturer goes on to demonstrate to his class that the only way to put the rocks in the jar is to put them in first. And then once you've got the rocks in, then you add the pebbles and give it a bit of a shake so the pebbles will fall in amongst the rocks. And then you add the sand to fill up those gaps. And then you add the water in to bring the contents up to the top of the jar. Now, the story is to illustrate that there is no way that you'll be able to get the rocks in the jar, or rocks being the most important thing, unless we put them in first. So this means we need to control our diaries or our calendars by putting the most important things in first, which is often blocking out time for us to work on our businesses. Otherwise, the Q1 busy work takes over and we never get time to work on our businesses. Unfortunately, most people only put their appointments with other people in their calendars and not appointments with themselves, which is often the rocks in the jar. So the difficulty in real life is that we have lots of rocks or important things that we want to put in our jar, but they won't all fit. So what do we do then? Well, we've got to choose which are the most important rocks to put in the jar. Now, we've all been told we can have it all, but that is actually a lie because we have to choose between the different options. So, for example, do I want a bigger, more profitable business and all the responsibilities that go with that? If so, are you prepared to invest a lot of capital into your business? Are you prepared to upskill and shoulder the associated stresses and risks, including managing lots of staff? And potentially one of the downsides could be missing out on time with family and friends. Or another option is perhaps, do you want a smaller business that's easy to run, but has less leverage potential? If so, are you prepared to put more personal effort into earning each business dollar and potentially still miss out on some time with family and friends? Or do you want perhaps more time for hobbies or to be hands-on in the upbringing of your children? If so, how does your business fit into that model? And if you want to leave a financial or some type of legacy to your family or the world, what does that entail? Because it's a fallacy that we can have it all. We all need to make choices, and the best choices are those that we make proactively and with awareness. Most of us start our businesses or buy a business because we want to earn more money and we want to be our own boss, but we often don't think much about what we really want our life to look like or what we want to get out of life. Which brings us to the biggest question of all: what do we want? What is the vision for your life, and how does your business fit in with that? So before you do a business plan, really you should have a life plan first. So this brings me to the 3 business tips that I want to share with you today. Business planning is something that's got a bit of a bad name. It conjures up a vision of a 3 inches thick business plan that costs $10,000 to develop, and then once it's done, it sits in the bottom drawer, never to be looked at again. What a wasted opportunity. A Q2 business plan identifies the 3 key things you need to focus on this year. Now, there are many things you could do, i.e. the rocks you could put in your jar, that you could do to improve your business. There's different projects and challenges and areas to improve. But because we have limited time and resources, we need to choose which are the top 3 for this coming year. So why is that powerful? It's powerful because there's always more than 3 rocks that we can or want to put in the jar, and we often need help choosing which ones they should be, and then have someone hold us accountable for those choices. So my business tip number 1 is have a written business plan. And ideally it should only be a couple of pages long, and it should cover in summary form your 5-year vision for the future and relating how your business relates to your life plan, who your target market are and what your promise is to your target market, because that's your competitive advantage, and you need to be very, very clear on exactly what it is. You need to identify your key performance indicators or KPIs, and normally we shouldn't really be measuring more than 5. We need a high level budget for the coming year, and we need 3 one-year goals that are SMART. SMART standing for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So we need 3 goals, and then we break those 3 goals down into smaller chunks that you can complete in the next 90 days. And the most important tasks that need to be completed to achieve those smaller chunks need to be itemized out. What are you going to actually work on over the next 90 days? Who's holding you accountable to achieve those? And who's the champion? Who's responsible for making sure that those tasks are completed? All our most successful business clients have a Q2 business plan. My second business tip is controlling your diary. And we do this by setting time aside for the Q2 activities so that you can execute your plan. Because unless you block out at least 2 hours a week to work on the plan, it probably won't be executed. Our lives get so busy that few of us actually set time aside to read or to think or to work on ourselves or our businesses. And just to refresh your memory, the Q2 activities are things such as preparation, planning, values clarification, skills development, planning, relationship building, recreation, and empowerment. So you need to set time aside for those Q2 activities, and ideally you'll build them into your weekly routines. My third business tip is about knowing your numbers. Now, every business should have a financial budget or forecast, because unless you know how much money you plan to make this year, how will you know if it's going to be enough, or whether or not you've even achieved your budget? The second thing you need to be monitoring is your KPIs. And ideally, these will include some lead indicators as well as lag indicators. A lead indicator would be, for example, the number of sales phone calls made a week, or the number of social media campaigns launched each month, while a lag indicator could be the sales or the number of new customers onboarded. And then finally, you should be getting monthly management reports. These should compare your actual results to your forecast. Now, most small businesses have software such as Xero, so we have the tools available, but many business owners don't use the tools as intended. In fact, many business owners only use Xero so they can file their GST returns, which is a real shame. Instead, Xero should be used so that you have real-time numbers at your fingertips and accurate monthly financial reports. And as well as that, business owners need to examine those numbers, think about what they mean, and what they can do to improve them. That's my 3 business tips. Now, over to you again, Linda.
Thank you, Anne. Well, there was a lot of information there, and that's why we suggest that you take some notes. Thanks, Anne. That was brilliant. I think you should be my accountant as well as my best friend.
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. So you now know what you need to do in your business, but how are you going to deal with this thing called financial anxiety? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a few coping mechanisms. Back on that earlier slide, there was a 4th piece of the pie, and that little piece of the pie is how do you deal with financial anxiety? What you do is you face it. You go into defense mode. In your business, you do everything that Anne has just suggested that you do. You get very, very connected with your money. You get very connected with your family, and you take action. And taking action is what is going to result in you preserving your position, mitigating risk, and potentially doing a lot better than you were before. Now, you might need to take a step back from media. If you recognise that listening to the news is causing you stress, then stop listening to the news. Start focusing on your own situation, what you control, and what is out of your control. Just don't concern yourself with that. Now, the really interesting thing about stress is that we also have a physiological response. And one of the easiest ways to identify whether you are stressed or not, and you might like to do that now, is to hold your hand. You can hold your own hand, or if you're sitting next to somebody else, you might like to hold theirs. Because when we are stressed, what happens is the blood rushes to our heart and our hands will get cold. Now, before I came online with Anne to do this presentation, obviously presenting causes a little bit of stress, and I could feel that my hands were a little cold. So to calm myself down, I took a few deep breaths, held my hand, and away I went, and it's fine, and it does dissipate. I know it sounds weird. Try it. It really does work. Because what happens if you try and make decisions when you are in that stressed mode, you will not make good decisions, okay? So hold your hands. Then look at what are you thinking. Your thoughts, again, when you are stressed, are going to be distorted. You are going to think irrationally. So what you want to do is reframe your thoughts, and you want to debunk some of these thoughts that are coming along. So what do I mean by that? Well, say, for example, you might be looking at your bank account and you'll be going, good grief, I have not got enough money to last me through to the end of the month. Right. So how many times in your life have you had money in your bank account and you have made it to the end of the month? Is this a real concern, or is this a stress-related concern? So address those concerns, face them, and then look at what is really happening and what is really going on. Now, this bit here, I know you're probably going to say, oh, Linda, you're going a bit into la-la woo-woo land here. But when you feel anxious, one of the best things that you can do is breathing exercises. It's meditation. It's journaling. For those of you who like to get out into the great outdoors, it's physical activity. Now, Penny, my PA, who was here just before, she was saying, good grief, Linda, I'm never going to do any of that. And I said, it's okay, Penny, because if you actually feel that for your stress release, you need to go and find a quiet place on a beach or in your house somewhere and swear and scream and get it out like that, then that's what you do. Whatever it is you need to do to reduce your stress is what you are going to do. Now, look at your behaviours. What are you actually doing? Are you procrastinating and just not doing things? Or have you gone to the other extreme where you're going a bit down perfection mode and you are looking at your bank accounts all the time? You're checking zero every 5 minutes to see if everything has changed, and you've just got no flexibility going on. Well, for me, when I get into this kind of heightened state, writing is what I do. I just grab my journal and I vent and I just write it all out on paper. So just think about it. What is it that's going to work for you? You might need to try a few different things before you find the right mechanism for you. Number 2, take action. Now, Anne said this as well in your business. We all know, don't we? Knowledge is power. What you measure, you can manage. So don't forget to do that in your personal life as well. So, it's time to look at your own numbers, what's going on in your household, as well as what's going on in your business. Now, I know when you're feeling stressed and anxious, the last thing you want to do for a lot of us is look at your numbers. So you need to put on your big girl or your big boy pants, because it's time to look at what is happening. Now, however you choose to do it in your personal finances, you do need to know what's coming in. You need to know what is going out. Now, this is what is really happening, not what you think is happening, because remember, when you are stressed, you're not necessarily thinking straight and you probably won't know. So you're going to need to do some analysis. Now, I did this with some of my clients, and one lovely couple discovered that they were spending more on pet food than they were on food for their children. Now, that was a bit of a shock to the system, but once we knew, it was quite an easy fix, because the cat didn't know that their food was now coming from the supermarket, not the vet. Okay, so it's things like that that you might start to notice as you go through that process. Now, again, I've talked a little bit about money personalities, and there's a couple of money personalities that will struggle with looking at their numbers, and that's my spenders and my avoiders. So if you are that money personality, you need to find someone to help you. Now, that will ideally be someone who has more of a hoarder personality, because they're the ones who love numbers and they love spreadsheets, and they will love to help you. Just be really careful you don't pick someone who's going to judge you, because you don't need that right now. You just need help and support and understanding what's going on in your numbers. As Anne said in your business, exactly the same in your personal life. Analyze, track, review, modify. Just look for the low-hanging fruit. These are the questions I ask you. What are you paying for that you're not using? What can you reduce? What habits can you change? How can you change some behaviours and some habits that you've got that will change the way you spend your money? Do you really need 5 streaming services right now, or will 2 be perfectly okay? You need to start tracking. Again, 0 is actually really good for your personal finance as well as your business. So tracking, be really clear, and then you can understand things like, okay, I now know my groceries have gone up $60 a week. I also know that if I chop out 2 streaming services, I'm going to get some of that money back. Those are the kind of specifics that you want to get into when you're looking at your personal finances as well. And then the same thing, review and check. What did you think was going to happen to what has actually happened? It's all about monitoring and tweaking as you go along. And also, don't forget, there's another side of this equation. It's not just about what's going out. It's also about what is coming in. In other words, how can you increase your income? And if you are a business owner, then talking to Anne is an ideal scenario, because they can help you understand how to increase what is coming through your business and grow your business. So you've got a great opportunity there as well. And the last thing, and again, I think this is the thing that us as Kiwis really struggle with, is communicate. Please do not try and deal with whatever is going on all by yourself. One thing that we all do know is that stress transfers. If you are stressed, your partner, your business colleagues, your friends, your family are going to notice. And if they say to you, are you okay? And you go, oh, yes, I'm perfectly fine. they're going to know you're telling porcupines. They're going to know you're stressed, and they're going to start to get stressed and anxious about why you're stressed. And again, because we focus on negativity, we're going to go, what have I done wrong? Why is my partner upset? What have I done wrong? And you're going to get stressed, and you get into this vicious cycle. So whatever it is, please, you really do need to communicate very clearly and openly with each other. Now, one of you is going to be better at the numbers than the other. When you start to have a conversation with your partner and your family about what's going on in your financial life, conversation number one, please do not bring out the spreadsheets. This is not the time to get into deep dive analysis. All we want you to do at this stage is just talk in general terms about stress and anxiety. Do the hand-holding exercise that I've just talked about. So, don't bury your head in the sand. That's the last thing that you want you to do right now. So just have a really general conversation, and maybe take it away from you and talk about some friends and go, or some business colleagues, or something I read in the news, to kind of introduce the concept, particularly if you're not used to talking about money in your relationship. So this first conversation is going to be a very, very gentle conversation about feelings and emotions, and that life is a bit tough right now, and maybe you're feeling a bit anxious. Then give your partner some time to absorb what you have said, and then have what I call the kitchen table conversation. Now, a kitchen table conversation is a brainstorming activity. This might be where you bring out a few numbers in spreadsheets, depending on how it's going. You know your partner better than I do. What you want to do is you just want to put every idea on the table that you can think of. Nothing is stupid. Nothing is too ridiculous to put on the table. It's not about judging or anything like that. You're being totally open with each other and brainstorming. You can be realistic about what you need or you want to change, and come up with some really creative ideas. What alternatives can you come up with? Remain confident. Put a plan in place in exactly the same way you're planning your business. You should be planning your personal finances in your life as well. How can you help each other in this? What jobs are you going to do? How are you going to work together as a team? Because as a team is how you will get through all of this financial anxiety and start to thrive. Now, depending on the age of your children, some of them might be too young to understand money, but get them involved as well, because also children will pick up on stress, and they will realise that mum and dad are anxious, and like everything else, they will start to think it's them and blame themselves. And kiddies can be really creative on how they think about things. I had one family where mum and dad were chatting to the children about the reward system they had in place. You know what the kids came up with? Instead of wanting sugary treats for doing their chores, they said, hey, can we just go to the park instead? Now, that didn't save a huge amount of money, but it was something, and it made the kids feel so involved in the family and the decisions that were being made. And also, it's a great learning experience for them as well. Now, it may be that you also need to involve other family members, maybe parents, or I don't know, anyone else that you might need some support from. It might just be for moral support. It might be with some of your friends that you're kind of saying, well, let's not go out for dinner as frequently as we might to, let's do a potluck at home. That might be a strategy that you come up with. And it may be that you actually even might need to ask some family members, depending on your scenario, for financial support. But the main thing here is, please, as a couple, as a family, talk about what's happening. Talk about what's happening in life. Talk about what's happening in your business, because by all of you getting on board, you will come out so much stronger at the end of all of this. So there we have it. This is kind of the end of the formal bit of the presentation, and I see Anne and I have done really well, because we've still got about 5 minutes left. So where are we going to from here, Anne? I think this is back over to you.
Okay. So it's time now for you to decide on what you're going to do. And what we'd like you to do after this webinar finishes is take a few minutes to think about what 3 actions you're going to take that will add value to your business or your life. Think about the problems that you're experiencing in your business or personally, and then identify those problems and use this opportunity to create a plan and fix them. And be creative, as Linda suggested. You can have quite a bit of fun thinking of ways of fixing these problems that you're experiencing in a way that's actually a bit of a win for everybody. So there's no right or wrong answer. Just be creative and ask for help. So do write down the 3 actions that you're going to take as the things that popped up to you as we went through this webinar. Because right now, doing nothing, especially right now, it shouldn't be an option. So we have some next steps of ways that we may be able to help you. So, for example, you could book a complimentary meeting with me or with Linda, and on the feedback form, there will be an option if you would like to take up that opportunity to meet with either of us. It will be obligation-free and can be arranged at a time that's mutually convenient for everybody, either potentially face-to-face if you're in Auckland and you prefer that way of meeting, or potentially via Zoom if you're not in Auckland or travel's an issue. So if you would like to take up the opportunity of having a meeting with us, please tick those boxes on the survey that comes immediately after this webinar finishes. There's nothing to lose, and potentially there's plenty to gain as a result of meeting with either Linda or myself, or both of us potentially, and seeing where that conversation might take you.
Yeah. So this is a really great quote. Anne and I both follow Darren Hardy, and for business owners, he's very entrepreneurial, and he's probably one of the people it's worth following and having a look. He said this. He said there are 3 types of people in this world. There are those that make things happen. There are those that watch things happen, and there are those that wonder what just happened. And we really want you to be one of those people who makes things happen. And by attending this webinar, we know you've got that in you, and we know that you are the type of people who will make things happen, and you will take the action that you need to take and that you want to take. Thank you once again for attending. We've given you lots of ideas. We hope you've enjoyed it, and we're going to leave you now to carry on with your day. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. It was great seeing you all. Bye.